right, welcome back to the Partnership Mastermind podcast. I'm your host, Chris Lavoie. Today we've got someone who's built and scaled partner programs across some of the most respected names in tech: Cisco, Box, Miro, Airtable, and now runs one of the sharpest newsletters in the game, Partner Principles, with nearly 10,000 subscribers. Whether you're a partner pro trying to go from 0 to 1 or a leader looking to unlock customer-led growth at scale, Nelson Wang has done it. We're talking about building from scratch, leading with frameworks, coaching high-performing teams, and making the leap from corporate to entrepreneurship. Nelson, welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Chris. What an intro. Really appreciate it.
I tell you,
So nice of you.
Well, I mean, it's easy when your guests have incredible backgrounds, right? It makes it easy for me to come up with these. But look, first things first, we always kick things off with some quick hitters so people get to know you right away, and then we'll get into the fun stuff. You ready for that?
Sounds good.
Sweet. First question is, what's one small daily habit that's had an outsized impact on your partnerships career?
I will actually share two.
Sure.
One that you're going to hear about a lot today is reminding yourself to focus on the customer as a core principle. And I find many of the challenges we run into with partnerships around strategy, around recruitment, enablement programs, etc. If you start with a customer and then work downstream, you'll generally land on a really good answer. So that's one of the first daily habits I recommend, is anchoring back to that core principle. The second one that I think is really helpful, but is a bit more broad and not just specific to partnerships, is we get a lot of stuff thrown at us, and many partnership leaders are in very reactive type modes. And I want to remind the audience that there are only so many things that are worth your energy and time. And so one of the things that you can do to help manage the stress around this is to do something called the 10 years rule, which is when you run into these stressful situations with partners or something that might arise with a partner, just take a step back, take a breath, and ask yourself, does this matter in 10 minutes? Does it matter in 10 months? Does it matter in 10 years? And generally, as you play it out over the long time frame, it usually doesn't really have this big impact that you're thinking that it does. And so it's a good reminder to put things into perspective. And for me, that's been one of the things that have really helped me maintain this calmness in what happens to be usually very stressful partnership situations that it can arise. So hopefully that's helpful.
Super helpful, Nelson. We will get into that later. But one thing I think about as you explain that is, you talk about how a lot of us are kind of in that reactive state, not working backwards from the customer. Candidly, I think a lot of it is because we have a lot of early stage, mid-stage career folks who are making a lot of these upfront decisions on who to partner with, and they are living and dying by their quota cycle, right? And I find it's not until you really get further in your career, certainly like yourself, where you actually have that confidence and experience to lean on, where you're like, you know what, I need to be thinking longer term, and I can't be letting my short-term kind of anxieties around hitting quota dictate these major decisions I'm making. So I'll ask you a little bit later on if that kind of resonates with your model, but I certainly agree with the concept of needing to zoom out and work backwards from the customer, which, yeah, leads us to the second question nicely, which is, in your 17 plus stellar career, what's the single best first question you've ever asked a customer that completely changed the direction of a partner strategy?
I would say it's around asking them, like, where in your journey with us do you see challenges and gaps that are impacting your biggest business outcomes? And this question arises from really having this deep empathy for your customer and wanting to learn about how you can help them. And when you really understand those problem sets and how it ties to tangible business outcomes, you're then better able to understand which partner types can go in and help them and solve for those problems. And so that's something I highly encourage. And the piece that is tied to that, of course, is go out there and meet the customers. I know we have partner, in our leadership titles or our roles today, but, don't just meet the partners, also take the time to ensure that you get in front of customers and really understand their problem set.
Yeah, I'm glad you said that, Nelson, and we'll unpack that later on today. I think one of the biggest mistakes partner programs, partner leaders, partner ICs make is they use this excuse of, okay, well, I'm not in a customer-facing role per se, like an AE or a CSM or an account manager. so I don't therefore need to really spend much time with them. I think that's a flawed and limited mindset, especially when you're working in product and tech-oriented partnerships where you really do need to work backwards from the customer, where, how they would, want integrations to be built out, et cetera, to support their business outcomes. So I'm glad you brought that up, but we'll certainly dive into that one a bit later. Next one is around AI, which will be a theme, of course, today in our conversation. But the next question for you is, if you could pick only one AI-powered workflow for a partnership team to master in 2025, what would it be? And I know you're really bullish on this, obviously, and you've got a lot of good examples. Curious which one you'd choose.
With AI and partner leaders deploying it within their set of use cases, some of the core principles I think about are: one, is that workflow highly repetitive, or is it, you know, medium level or low? That's something to consider. Another is, can you get to quality data to help guide AI in that workflow? The third principle I think about is business impact, right? Where does it measure on that? The other one is feasibility. Another one is level of effort. And then the last one that I think about is, you want to make sure human in the loop is happening so that you can quality check things to make sure that it meets what you're looking for in that quality bar. One that I can think of right off the bat that has a high feasibility, lower level of effort, but has dramatic business impact is leveraging this platform called Gamma. And the reason I highly recommend them is I saw a problem set where partners can sometimes take a long time to build a proposal because they want to make it custom to the customer color scheme, branding, logo, their use case, the details of what they're going to work on.
Right.
And sometimes that can take as long as like a week. But by leveraging Gamma to build the presentation, I would literally see partners who are, eventually trained on it and being able to leverage it. They could roll out proposals as quickly as an hour that were highly personalized to that customer by use case, by function, by vertical, logo, branding, like I talked about. And when I saw the customer reaction, it was delightful, right? They were like, "This is incredible. Thank you for getting it over so quickly." I think some were even perplexed how they could even happen so quickly. But what it showed is a tremendous impact on the business side to help us close deals in a personalized way and ultimately at a higher conversion rate. And so that's one I can think of right away that can add dramatic value, but the lift to get there is not as high as some of the other platforms that you might see with AI and the use cases they serve.
Yeah, I think that's a really representative example that I'm sure anyone listening right now is like, you know what, definitely need to steal that, because that's a challenge that I face weekly. And I love that you kind of, started us off with your core principles of how do you actually decide what's worth your investment. And I think we're all in the camp of, experiment and fail fast. But I think whenever you're going to implement something more long term that has more lift required on a week to week basis, I love the idea of kind of filtering those through your principles to kind of figure out what makes sense. Sweet. And speaking of that, last question for you here on the quick hitters is, no one knows partner principles better than you. So what's one partner principle you put on a billboard for the whole industry to see? If you had to pick one, I know this is tough for you.
If I had to pick one, we've already talked about customer centricity, so I won't mention that one for this. And the other one I would mention is the importance of focus. Focus is a superpower. So you have to learn to say no to things. That is a good thing. And you have to force that hard question on yourself, which is, what do I really need to invest in that truly moves the needle? And what do I say no to and divest from so that we don't spend energy on the wrong areas? And you'll get outsized results by having tremendous focus.
Yeah, I love that. And we certainly agree in the mastermind community. One of the core concepts I teach on day one is yes is the most expensive word in the English language, which is really relevant in a partnership sense, where I constantly talk to ICs and leaders who say they're just, drinking from the fire hose well after onboarding is done, and they just don't know how to prioritize and understand the difference between signal to noise. So I'm excited to dive into that later with you on that one, Nelson. But cool, we're going to get into the fun stuff now. And you have this insane career arc, but I do want to start at the beginning to understand kind of your path to today. So you started with Cisco training program in North Carolina, your first partnerships role. So I'm curious, what hooked you on this path?
So there's a 1-year training program at Cisco, and this is in North Carolina. There's, I believe, a couple hundred people that enrolled. And we basically did training and field support for that year. And then at the end of the year, we had to interview for field positions, and it could be across different roles from sales engineering to sales to partnerships, etc. And what happened is I interviewed for 5 different positions, and I was ranked second to last in 4 of them. And those were all sales roles. And I had one interview left. It was for a partnerships job. And I interviewed and I prepped like crazy. I had like this whole presentation built. I had it memorized, walked the person through that presentation. I thought I did really well this time. And they told me, well, actually, you ranked second, but you're lucky because the other person took another job. And so you can get this position. So I basically lucked out because I don't know what would have happened if I didn't get that fifth and final opportunity to convert into an actual job. And so what happened is that's how I landed into partnerships at Cisco in the field in the Bay Area to start.
Wow. I don't think I've ever heard anyone enter into partnerships quite that way in this like competitive landscape and then kind of fell into it, which obviously was a tremendous kind of outcome for you given your career you've gone to have. Now, in our prep, you talked about one big early mistake you may have made that you were able to correct for ultimately, but was something that was difficult to kind of overcome in the beginning, which was bringing a playbook from one company into another. So fast forward beyond the Cisco days, right? And just thinking that that playbook would work. I've personally made that mistake as well, assuming something that I've succeeded on from a previous role will translate nicely into a future role. So can you walk me through that moment and how it may have shifted your entire approach moving forward?
It's easy to fall in love with a previous playbook, right? Because it worked really well at that other company. And you start thinking, well, I could just replicate it and bring it over here. I have my book of partners. For sure, it'll work a second time around. It must, right? Because the first time was so successful. And what I found is, yes, sometimes you can luck into it and it does work. But often, what I find is every company is so distinctly different, even if they're in the same type of platform or same segments, even the same economic buyers. Even if that's the case, it's not always exactly one to one the same. And so, what's really important is you slow down. Don't just try to bring over that playbook, but instead get to know the customer, understand the ICP, understand their customer journey step by step and the challenges they have and the impact to their business, map it back to how partners can help. And if you operate from that first principles approach, you're going to have a much higher probability for success. And you're going to test for partner market fit very quickly to make sure that it works. And then you've got something that you can operate from and scale from that is a framework versus a playbook you're trying to bring from another company. So I've run into that problem a couple times. I no longer bring in playbooks from previous companies. I always start with a process and a framework around a customer assessment, really understanding their needs, then mapping it back to the partner types and the programs and go to market that you want to roll out from there.
Yeah, it's a really great kind of humble account of something that a lot of us do, especially in more leadership roles where you move into a new role. Maybe it's a first time head of or VP role, and you know you need to make a strong impact pretty quickly. So the natural psychological thing to do is to just bring in your old playbooks. Nelson referenced a bunch of issues from that assumption, but a few other things as well that I think of is it also assumes that the employees at that new company are going to be the same, right? Whereas you're starting off, you have no cross-functional alliances, right? You have no traction with them. They might see your resume, but they haven't won or benefited from you yet. But also it kind of burns trust a bit to show up and just say, hey, look, I've got all my playbooks. We're just going to throw it in here and it's all going to work. It actually builds a ton of credibility to come in and say, you know what, here's what I've run in the past that was successful, but guess what? I'm not going to assume that things are the same here. So I'm going to reference those as I see fit, but ultimately I'm here to build with you all, right? And see what we can build together. So it sounds like you're from the same camp, Nelson.
Yeah, absolutely. And Chris, you brought up such an interesting and important point, which is there's a lot of credibility from speaking directly to customers because ultimately the cross-functional teams will anchor to that, right? Which is how do we go make big impact for our customers? So there's huge amount of credibility from doing that. The second one you mentioned is also really important, which is the credibility from doing the assessment and listening with your cross-functional team members. So go meet with customer success, go meet with sales, go meet with engineering, go meet with product, go meet with operations, finance, the C-suite. Hear their feedback, right? And understand their pain points in their journey, the outcomes and success metrics they're trying to get to, and then play it back to them on how partners can help them get there. So I think that is also really critical because that gives you credibility when you have done the work to do the internal assessment as well.
Yeah, I really couldn't agree more. And I've personally made that mistake where I just didn't invest enough in those cross functional relationships in the early days, and it cost me. So I definitely pass that along to anyone who's kind of entering their first leadership level role. Cool. Let's fast forward now and get into one of your most, passionate topics that I know you're excited to chat about, which is customer centricity. You alluded to it earlier in our quick 5 hitting questions. Now let's talk about a bit about that. How do you actually build that empathy muscle so you actually understand what drives value for customers? I think most people listening to this would say, okay, yeah, it makes sense. We should have a pretty good grasp of what our customers want as it pertains to kind of informing our partnership strategy. But I think 90+% of people in partner roles don't really lean in and know what it takes to work backwards from customer needs. So how do you actually approach understanding what drives value for customers and then informing that into driving your strategy?
Yeah, I'm glad you brought that up because that's a very common question I get when I'm either consulting companies or other partner leaders. And they usually ask exactly that, which is like, how do I actually go and practically do this? Like, what are the steps to get there? One of the first things is you really want to work with your cross-functional internal teams. So think about the AEs, the CSMs that own those customer relationships or have deep customer relationships. And what you're going to ask is for help. And the reason is you want to meet with the customer to make sure you really understand their journey and their challenges and what's impacting their business, because then you can map back and serve them better with the partner types and the partners that will ultimately help them get to the outcome. And so it is in their best interest, right, to make sure that we're building the right partner ecosystem to serve them. And that's why we need this assessment discussion to be able to do that effectively. And then so what ends up happening is, as an example, CSMs would help me get that meeting with the customer. And what we would have is a set of slides and a set of questions to basically really understand their journey. So a couple of key questions you can ask. One, what have been your biggest challenges in deploying our platform and getting to those business outcomes? A follow-up, what are those business outcomes in specificity, right? What's going to make the biggest impact for you on those outcomes? Next, show a slide and come with a point of view from what you've heard so far or what your thesis is, and say, here's how we think we could help with partners on your journey. So for example, if the customer journey is to do workflow discovery, solution design, implementation, training, change management, ongoing support, you might show that on a slide and say, here's where partners can help, for example, with services. Or if it's with adding, a workflow to one of their processes, it might be a technology integration. And then you would say, like, here are the ways we visually think we can help you on this slide. Do you agree with that? Where would you give us feedback? Is it the right taxonomy? I found that slide was really helpful because it's really hard for some customers to start from a blank slate, right? Like if you show them the steps, they can react to it and tell you, hey, look, no, it's missing a step, or that's not what we call it here. We use a different word. And that level of specificity and feedback from a customer is so incredibly helpful because that will then guide you on how to inform your partners on how to best serve them. And then a couple other questions you can think about. What third-party companies are you already working with to help you in your journey with our platform? Why did you engage these companies? Another one to think about is what would be a fair exchange of value to work with these partners on to solve for these problems? And you'd be surprised by some of these answers. Customers would tell me, for example, we are more than willing to pay for this service because this problem is so important to us, right? And they start to talk about what their budget is potentially or what they've spent in the past. And so what you'll find is many of them are very forthcoming with this information. And then lastly, you can validate this with, look, would you be open to working with third parties if you don't already today to get to this business outcomes? And I remember asking this question and getting very visceral responses saying, absolutely, happy to. Like, again, we are more than happy to work with a third party. We'd even pay for it. And again, that quickly validates your thesis around partners as a go-to-market for integrations or for services delivery and so forth.
Yeah, really great breakdown. And it begs the question for me, Nelson. I listen to you. Anyone listening to this would say, okay, this makes perfect sense. We absolutely need to lean into doing more with the customers to really understand how to drive our strategy. But clearly, as we already mentioned, it's not happening. Someone talented and experienced like yourself obviously gets it. I myself get it. At the end of the day, you're either doing something to drive more top of funnel velocity and quality pipeline, or you're helping drive pipeline to close, or we're helping to drive retention and expansion. Like at the end of the day, if what you're doing on a daily basis does not directly feed those things, then you're doing the wrong things. So we get it. But my next question for you is, why isn't the average partner practitioner doing that? What is it? Is it something that they're lacking in skills, confidence, or guidance from their leadership? What is it that's preventing more partner programs from really leaning into customer centricity, as you've eloquently outlined?
This is a very personal topic, I would say, that's near and dear to my heart. And what I mean by that is it's because I've done this a lot previously early on in my career, which is I really focus too much energy just on the tactics. Because what can happen is if you're oriented around these goals and you're trying to optimize for hitting the goal, but you don't really understand the why behind it and what it means to the customer, you end up focusing a lot on tactics and playbooks to try to get you to that specific outcome. And the most common one we all know is partner source revenue and pipeline. And so you'll run things like a call campaign or an email campaign, or you'll get the partner to do paid ads or try to do a better job on content marketing or events. The list goes on and on, right? Those are tactics. And what ends up happening is if you don't solve for the root problem, which is making sure you're really driving a lot of customer value and building a flywheel model around that, which I can go more in detail later, what ends up happening is you do these tactics, and yes, you might see a lift, but I can promise you over time, you're going to hit a plateau because tactics only get you so far. And what you really have to solve for strategically is ensuring that you're solving for big customer problems that have massive impact to their business. And you're creating a flywheel so that your partner strategy is sustainable for the long term. And that is something that is often missed if you focus on the tactics.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with that. Beautiful things happen when you start with the moving the needle on big customer outcomes, especially if you're in product and tech partnerships. If your product or platform has a gaping hole in terms of a use case that you could consider building or acquiring, but ultimately if you're able to fill that efficiently and powerfully with integration through the partnering path, that is something that will absolutely get noticed in the leadership ranks. Not to mention, it will parlay into probably a really successful partnership with that integration. So I'm glad that we've drilled down on that. The next topic is something that you're also known for in the market as a top expert on, which is this concept of partner market fit. Right? I think most of us are familiar with product market fit in the confines of kind of building a company from scratch, but you ultimately have built some really powerful frameworks for achieving partner market fit in a fast and efficient path. So the first question for you on this topic is, can you break down the three sides of partner market fit for someone hearing it for the first time?
Yeah. Actually, let me do this through stories because I think this will
Love
really
it.
resonate with the audience. And I'm going to share the stories of these two companies. There were partners that I worked with that are absolutely incredible. They're called Optimize IS and Red Consulting. And they've publicly written about this a lot on LinkedIn. You can see a lot of their stories out there, but I'll play it back and how it fits into partner market fit. So, one of the first things that we did when we built this partner program from 0 to 1 over at Airtable is we had to figure out who are the partners that are going to solve for these customer problems that we uncovered during the discovery and assessment process. And at the time, in the initial phase, you don't know 100% because you're just starting to build it out, right? And so what you do is you create these hypotheses and you basically want to test with the different partner types you think can go solve for those problems. And so when I met with Rudd Consulting and Optimize IS at the time, in the very beginning, they were actually one person for each of them respectively. And so if you looked at the 4 C's of the ideal partner profile, capacity, capability, commitment, and customer alignment, on the capacity side, they would just show one there because it was one person. And so for some people, they might overlook that and say, like, well, on the capacity side, they're only one person. Is that the right fit? And they jump to that conclusion, right? And they maybe don't partner with that company. But they were so strong in the other 3 C's on capability, very, very skilled at Airtable, highly committed, right? Would be willing to do so much incredible work into the weekends, late night, whatever it took to make the customer successful. And also were aligned with the customer because they had other proof points that they already worked on within the Airtable environment. They scored really well on the other 3 C's. So what we did is we had a test for partner market fit. And what we did was we started working on engagements with them where we brought them in to solve for the gap on the customer journey related to the services needs. And we would go and actually go pitch these professional services packages with them. And what happened is we basically went through that gamma proposal process that I showed you, and we're able to quickly win opportunities together. And those wins were immediate validation that they were solving for the customer challenges. And then we would follow up and ensure that the customer is happy because we would measure it based on a CSAT at the end of the project. And so what happened is we were able to quickly identify partner market fit through customer wins. And customer wins basically catch on like wildfire. When you play it back at a QBR or your sales team trainings, and you have the partner come and present on these wins, and then you have the AE chime in, and the CSM chime in, and the sales engineer chime in. There's a lot of credibility in that, and people really buy in when they hear these stories about customer wins. And ultimately, that is what changes the culture to get people to buy in with partners. And that's when the partner market fit really accelerates.
Yeah, phenomenal breakdown. We love stories to answer questions, and that was a really powerful example. And one thing I loved about that is, you indexed again on the customer win side. Obviously, that's been a theme for today, but I think it's important and non-trivial for this audience to really grasp, which is, hey, a lot of people need to win to make a partnership successful. You need to win. You need to fill your bank account to pay your bills. Your partner needs to win and their counterparts. But at the end of the day, if your customer isn't having the biggest win of all, you're not really going to hit your full potential. So I'm glad you took us down that path, Nelson. And so now at this point, we now know what it looks like to find true partner market fit. We know what it looks like in the wild and to know when it's real. The next question is, okay, you have it, right? You have this precious PMF in your hand. How do you approach scaling it? How do you go from those first few wins to something that's repeatable and eventually, in your case, award-winning?
Yeah, definitely systems and process. And so it's got to be repeatable. And you have to see the themes in the data of where you want to go invest in to scale it up as well. So, for example, if a partner is winning specifically within a vertical function use case and it's been basically scaling up specifically in one area, double down there, right? Something is clearly working there and go build your assets and your go to market and messaging around that. Right. As an example, one of the things that we did is we asked our partners to hone in on a focus area within verticals, functions, and or use cases that they would then go brand themselves around and bring to our internal teams, to customers. And so that way they became domain experts within those areas versus trying to do everything under the sun. And that really helped them to scale out much faster because they were seen as experts versus trying to do something very horizontal and broad. By the way, I would also mention, if you want a proof point around how this was successful, both of those companies I mentioned, Red Consulting and Optimize, are respectively now 12 team members and 45 team members, right? So it gives you a proof point around how quickly they were able to grow over those 2.5 years because they had the systems and processes in place around the key points that I mentioned to get to scale.
Yeah, that's why I was so excited to interview Nelson, because you're one of the rare people who really live and breathe by principles and kind of use that to kind of guide everything you do, because you had a hypothesis, you had a framework, you ran these partners through those principles, and then you're able to leverage those insights to ultimately achieve really successful outcomes. That's a perfect segue into your stint at Airtable in the spirit of scalability. Obviously, you were, started there from early days and helped scale it to an award-winning program driving many millions of dollars of influence revenue. So obviously, it's known now as one of the top leading ecosystem programs in B2B SaaS, due in large part to you and your team's efforts. But can you take us back to the early days? What was the state of affairs? What did things look like at Airtable when you first joined?
Airtable is just such an incredible platform. We had so much inbound partner interest. And when you looked at the different partner types, there were 6 different partner types expressing interest and thousands of applications that came in that wanted to partner in many different ways. And one of the most important things right off the bat was being very specific about focusing on one partner type to start that we felt would have the biggest customer impact. Did we have multiple partner programs eventually? Definitely. We had 3, formal programs and one additional one that we worked on reactively. But ultimately, when we started off, we really just focused on one. And that was around our services partners. And the reason for this is because when we spoke to the customers, and I met 60 enterprise customers to learn about this, they were very clear about where they needed help in the way that would most impact their business. And they were saying over and over again, I need help to be able to understand our existing internal workflows, all the relevant stakeholders. I want to figure out how to design this correctly, how to then implement, do the training, the change management, the ongoing support. And ultimately, these are services that we are happy to pay for to be able to make sure we get to the business outcome. And so services partners became this very clear partner type that we needed to go make a big bet on to ensure that our customers were going to be successful at the end of the day. And a big part of this was, not only landing on that focus, but then building the partner program to anchor around that. And one thing that we really were proud of is sometimes in partner programs, you can end up building a lot of different requirements. Like, oh, I've looked at these other partner programs. They have these 20 things. We should include that into ours. And, we should have this like point tiering system, and the list goes on and on. And we looked at that process of, baselining against other programs, all those different things you can include in. And what we realized is we don't want to include elements into a partner program just because we've seen it somewhere else. What we care about is, what does this partner program mean to our customers? Meaning, when our customers look at a partner program and they see a bronze, silver, and gold tier, why does it matter to them? And when we started from that, and we said, okay, well, if that's the case, then we're going to build out features of the partner program and requirements around that. It was very clarifying. Let me give you an example. One of the requirements we had on our partner program was a certain level of CSAT to be a gold tier, for example. And the reason that mattered is because if you're a customer and you're looking to hire a professional services partner, you want to make sure that they're delivering great outcomes and their customers are happy. So a CSAT score really matters as one data point, as an example, right? So that was like one thing that we built into the partner program. Another one was we want to know that the partner has successfully done this at scale. So we look at, for example, services revenue for that partner as an indicator of where else they're doing this and to what magnitude. That's another example where you have a customer lens on it. So those are just a few examples of what we, saw early on in the partner program and strategy build. Hopefully that's helpful for the audience.
Yeah, I mean, extremely helpful, especially because one of the biggest questions I get all the time, I'm sure you do as well in your kind of consulting and mentorship lens, is, hey, I just got my first head of partnerships, director of partnerships, or VP of partnerships role, and I don't really know where to begin. And so I'm sure you hear that a lot. And so what you just gave was a really important masterclass. I think one of the key takeaways for me, at least, was the need to ruthlessly prioritize, obviously working back from customers, which has been a theme today, but ultimately saying, okay, look, where's the lowest hanging fruit that has the biggest impact upside for our customers specifically, and let's really nail that. And before you start chewing on other partner types and partner motions, you really need to get that one right, and you're going to learn a ton that you can then replicate, so to speak, to translate to other motions. So I'm really glad we went down that path. Now let's keep going. This conversation has been quite linear by design. Let's keep going now, right? You've got partner market fit. You've validated a hypothesis around one or two partner channel types. Let's talk about the roadmap, right? How do you ultimately start scaling things, building a team, and ultimately creating a culture that could scale? What did that actually look like tactically?
One thing that's really important is as you're building, make sure you document the process to get to the outcomes so that you can share those best practices and learning with the team and they can iterate on that. And so what that can look like is many different form factors. It could be, your slide decks. It could be putting those into a wiki where it's then codified and everyone operates off of that as the OS. It could be within your PRM. But ultimately, what you do have to do is make sure that it's documented and that you can pass those along. What we did as an example is we would store it within Airtable. And so when I had a new hire join, I would guide them to that Airtable base and it would list out all the things that they would need to be ramped up on. And then over time, as we learn together, we would continually add to that as well. But that's really important to ensure that people are operating off of the same set of principles and also processes. So that way they are successful in their role as well.
Yeah, I mean, that's
And then
music.
tied to that,
You go
oh,
ahead,
sorry, Chris,
Nelson.
go
No,
ahead.
you're good, please.
Tied to that is the second part of this, which is you have to build that accountability and that rigor. And so, what becomes really important as well is to have that operating rhythm and cadence to ensure that you're working on the right big rocks that drive the outcomes that you're looking for. So, for example, if one of the things that you're trying to measure for is partner source pipeline, and you believe three major activities will go drive that on a weekly basis, are you measuring that? Are you discussing it every week? Are you talking about what's working and what isn't and trying to execute that? That type of operating rhythm and cadence will be important to ensure that there's accountability and you're actually getting there together as a team.
Yeah, really great examples around really great examples around that. And one thing that comes to mind for me is I love how you said operating in rhythm. And I'm a big fan of playbooks. This is something that I consistently teach in my programs, which is, what gets measured gets managed is great, but it's incomplete without the accompanying phrase, which is what gets documented gets done. So I'm definitely a stickler on the documentation. And the way I teach it as well is I say, hey, look, the way I expect you to kind of build and document your playbooks is if you were to decide tomorrow you're going to travel the world for a year and I need to hire someone equally as competent as you to come in tomorrow, can they come in tomorrow and pick up from the pieces from where you've left off and do your job effectively? Right. And I always get this blank stare. They're like, crap, there's definitely nothing documented for them to pick up. So that's kind of the reference point. I say, okay, it's okay that that's true now, but like, let's really get up and running. And obviously, the most important thing for someone like yourself is to lead by example, right? Does that resonate in terms of, hey, look, I'm not saying every system that I get you all to try is going to be perfect, but I do expect you to try to test this out and see if it will work and just trust that I'm going to continuously listen to you and iterate to find the sweet spot so we can really hit that operating rhythm. Does that resonate with you, Nelson?
It really does resonate. And as a leader, you should be in there with them to learn what's happening, right? See it firsthand,
100%.
go through that process yourself, feel the pain, and that'll give you the empathy to go solve it with them. I can't stress that enough. You have to lead from the front.
I love that. Cool. Well, the next one's a fun one, which is around myths and must kills, right? And I want to bust a few myths here. And one that you've called out is the obsession with top of funnel before building a sustainable flywheel. Help the audience understand why that is such a trap.
Yeah, I just wrote a LinkedIn post about this.
Love it. Good timing.
And yeah, I think it's very clear to us in the partner community what most people think about when they think about partner value add is where's my pipeline? Like, can you source pipeline? And the reality is that partners that actually do so much more to add value. Right? And I have a list that I wrote today on LinkedIn about it. It could be providing professional services to help customers get to the outcome, like I mentioned, that drives revenue, net retention, adoption growth. It could be driving down costs to deliver these services while also scaling capability and capacity, both internationally, for example, and locally. Leveraging existing stakeholder relationships, they can be your champion within the customer account. They can help you integrate your platform into a larger transformation solution for the customer to drive more business value. They can capture key business outcomes that help make a better business case for you to win the deal or to prevent a churn. They can help you build out POCs to show the art of the possible. They can bring vertical expertise and credibility, functional expertise and credibility. They can give financial incentives like better net terms or marketplace incentives. They can help you with brand awareness with co-marketing. They can help you navigate procurement more effectively. They can help you change the culture and level up competitive intensity. They can help you with contract vehicles to speed up deals in public sector and Fed. They can help unlock new workflows that add incremental business value. So those are a few examples where partners can add value. And it's a reminder that it's not just about top of funnel, although that is absolutely important. Partners can get you that, and that is incremental net new source revenue to the company, which is important. But you also have to factor in there's so many other ways they can also help you be successful with customers, like the ones that I listed off. And so what I remind people to think about is don't just think about that early stage piece of top of funnel. Think about the entire customer journey the partner can influence to help you be more successful in serving the customer. And also, the thing I would emphasize is if you really understand the customer needs, you help them solve for it and make big business impact, and then you select the partners to go solve for that, they will be able to typically monetize around that. And if your partners can monetize around solving those problems, then by nature, they will invest back into your business as a partner and build out a strong practice around it. And they will organically build top of funnel for you, right? Because if you've helped them build this massive business of solving these problems with your platform, then they will go surface other opportunities, given that that's where their focus around your platform. So that's the flywheel that I was talking about that is really critical. And ultimately, if you do that right, then you will have top of funnel sustainably over the long term with partners.
Yeah, I mean, that really is the blueprint, having both failed at trying to do it, but also having found success doing basically what you've said there. I can totally validate that blueprint. Candidly, if I was to chalk the reason up to why this doesn't happen enough, I would honestly point to something like compensation and misalignment and of incentives, where you have someone like, let's just take a standard VP of partnership. They get a close one revenue goal hung on their head, which is standard. And then they trickles down the kind of the ladder, so to speak, the director and then the frontline manager and then the frontline ICs. They all have the exact same quota, which is close one revenue. And I'm not here to say that's a flawed method, but if it's the only thing and there's no one at all within the partner org that has any type of incentive, either career or compensation wise, that's tied back to the actual customer outcomes, I think you're setting yourself up for failure. And you could be saying, oh, Chris, well, close one revenue, isn't that generating new customers? But it doesn't mean it's generating the right customers, right? If there's no clawbacks, for example, it's like, hey, look, if a deal that you close churns within the first 100 days, there's a clawback. If things like instruments like this aren't baked in, then you're going to get the outcomes that you could expect. So I'm curious, Nelson, the final question on that one is, how do you think compensation plans from the leadership level down impacts and ultimately prevents companies from unlocking the full potential of a partnership versus just focusing on pure pipeline?
That's such a great question. And what I would say is it's the responsibility of the partner leader to really be connected to each of those cross functional teams and make sure that everyone is customer centric in the partnership's approach and we're aligned on what we're trying to drive to serve the customer and how that ladders into the cross functional team's goals or where it doesn't. And that's because every company is at a different stage of the journey with their own regard, and you have to factor that in. And if you don't, what ends up happening is you end up trying to bring over this playbook that might have worked at another company, but is at a different stage. And things like compensation may not line up because it's just not where the customer is at in their stage of the journey. So that's why I always start with a customer centric component as one of the most important principles to anchor on, because compensation is really downstream of that, right? Which is, are you
Exactly.
solving the right problems and do the incentives align to solving those critical problems? Now, where there sometimes is a challenge is you might work at a company where they're not customer centric or they're not focusing on solving those problems. And they just go to you and they say, I want pipeline. That's it. And let's say that doesn't map to the customer journey, then yes, it can be very challenging in that role. So I think that's the key part of it is that partner leader has to be able to help other people see this customer centric approach and get them aligned and work together as one team to swim towards that.
Yeah, I love that. I think this is an important kind of call out and memo, so to speak, to any partner leader listening, that it's like, hey, that's ultimately your job. Yes, you've got to hit your quota to keep your job and keep your team's job. But the more you can align that to real customer outcomes and to top company level OKRs, the better off things are going to be for everyone involved. One of the last topics I want to get into is around hiring and coaching elite partner teams. You've hired and led some serious talent. Curious, for anyone listening who's hiring for the first time or looking to scale their team, what are the top attributes you're looking for in a partner leader in today's landscape?
Yeah, funny enough, I also wrote a LinkedIn post about this.
You write a lot of
There's
content, so there's going to be some overlap. Love it.
Yeah, totally, totally. There's a list that I had built, and I'll name a couple of the attributes that come to mind. The obvious one is customer centricity, so we won't spend any more energy on that. Another one that I think is really important is this one team mindset, because over and over again, in consulting a lot of companies lately, one thing I've seen is partnerships operates in a silo and shows up and says, "Here's what I did," and then hopes everyone is aligned and supportive. But really, what ends up happening is you get a lot of confusion, questions, and so you do not want to operate in a silo. In fact, I would suggest slow down to ensure that you're informing the cross-functional teams, you're learning from them, you're understanding how partnerships align to their outcomes and success metrics, and you have an operating cadence with them, right? So, for example, and it'll differ by company, right? But are you meeting quarterly, monthly, weekly with your legal team or your ops team or your sales team, right? To make sure that you're swimming towards the same goals with a one team mindset and they're embracing partnerships with you. Because I really believe this, if you want partners to massively succeed, one of the most important things is that the entire company embraces and supports partners with you, right? That's the one team mentality. That's something I look for, that mindset, when I hire leaders or people on the partner team. Another big one that comes to mind, and I'm very passionate about this, especially if you're one of the early builders of partner programs, which you mentioned your audience is you want to hire people that can win hearts and minds. Because you can have all the systems and process and mechanisms in the world, right? So like, don't advance this past stage 4 in Salesforce unless you do this. That's an example. But the reality is people can bypass that. There's exceptions, there's approvals, right? So that stuff works to a degree, but really in the beginning, if you want people to embrace partners, you want to drive change, you want to get people to rally behind it, you have got to win hearts and minds first and get people fired up about those customer wins and become evangelists for your partners. It's not enough for the partner team to do it because, hey, we're measured on it, we're biased, right? But you need those cross-functional folks who are not part of that saying, hey, partners are changing the way we do business. They're helping our customers dramatically. They're transforming things. That's when people get won over. And that's another big one that I look for.
I mean, I'm fired up and ready to run through a brick wall just listening to that, Nelson. Honestly, that you could just see the passion come out in you, which we love to see. I think I totally look for the same attributes when I'm hiring. I think someone who can do the job is table stakes, like someone who can follow an SOP to migrate deals through the funnel and engage partners and kind of run them through from disco to onboarding to activation. I think that's relatively table stakes. I just look for people with a growth mindset and a strong work ethic. I think, someone who reads the board meeting doc when it gets shared out throughout the company, someone who wants to, understand the mechanics of our company and our partners' company and our customers. The people who are curious, I think if I was to pick one word, really stands out. But one thing I do want to dive into as the final question on this topic is, okay, once you've got the team, you've hired the right people, how do you keep them trained? How do you keep coaching them, helping them improve and reach the next level and make sure that they don't burn out? Especially relevant now when companies' expectations of per employee performance is skyrocketing through AI, right? So how do you approach the full life cycle of an employee that you bring onto your team, whether you're their direct manager or not? How do you make sure that they get the training and mentorship they need to reach their full potential?
On your operating cadence with them, keep it really simple and ask them about 3 things that are working and 3 things that are not, that are truly blocking them and impacting the business outcomes. And then work through it with them side by side in a high touch manner to ensure you really are helping them. That is really critical. The other piece of this is, in that process of coaching them, teach them not just the answer, because that's not enough by itself. And in fact, before you get to the answer, encourage them to start with first principles thinking to try to figure out the answer in discussion with you. And what I find helpful is when you guide people on a way of thinking versus just giving the answer, their growth becomes tremendous when you go through that process. So that's going to be really important. Tied to that is also make sure you teach them to be genuinely curious, less of the whole like this is how I used to do it mentality, and more about, hey, can you tell me more about that, or can you teach me more about that, or what could this look like potentially, and that will really help their growth as well. The other big piece of this is you have to give them the freedom and safety to explore and experiment. So, for example, if one of your initiatives is to try to level up your partnerships team with AI, right? You want to bring them in a room, for example, and say, like, here are some of the things that we've identified as key goals we want to go hit, things that are blockers that we want to go solve for. Let's experiment together and ideate on ways we might be able to do this with AI. And then let's test it and then come back to the table a week from now and see how we actually did against that experimentation. And if it didn't work, we want to know about it, right? It's okay. If it worked, great. And if it didn't, that's okay too. Let's all share that and basically make sure everyone's comfortable and feeling safe to be able to do this experimentation to see what's going to actually move the needle. And then tied to that is you have to lead from the front. So for example, if you're trying to level up that team with AI, do it yourself too. Don't just ask other people
100%.
to do it. You have to go experiment. You have to go try. You have to have the willingness to potentially fail and then share that back with the team as well. So those are some key ways to be able to help the team continually grow and have the growth mindset.
Yeah, I can't. I'm smiling ear to ear listening to that because as someone who is a passionate leader and educator, I really do feel like that is the exact blueprint to follow. Things like giving them a safe space to experiment and leading by example when you're doing so. I think, sometimes I over experiment and that might drive my team a little bit nuts because like, oh, there goes Chris again trying something new. But I think when they see you trying things, and especially when you report back on how it worked, including when it doesn't work, I think that drives a lot of trust. I think when they see their leader, like, man, Nelson's at it again. He's trying this new system, but he's respecting us, our time. He's giving us a safe space to try it. If it doesn't work, he's owning up to that and being honest about that. I think that is just such a great way to kind of inspire your team to be innovative and bring that growth mindset. So I'm glad you brought that up. The last segment that I want to wrap up with is to just catch the audience up with where you're at today in your career. And you've recently just stepped away from Airtable after an extremely successful stint there, focusing now all in on partner principles, which is your consulting and services based company. Would love to know, first question, when did you know this side project could be something such as your main thing that you really focus full time on?
When did I know? I don't have an exact like kind of period, I would say. I would just say one thing that stood out to me is when I shared lessons on LinkedIn, there was so much feedback about how helpful it was. That motivated me to keep sharing. And it made me realize partner leaders really need a lot of help. And when I look back on my 20 years of doing partnerships, wow, like I was like, I could have used so much help along the way. And I could have been so much more successful if I had the right first principles thinking and training and mentorship early in my career. And I wish I learned it on day one, stepping into the field versus many years later through experiential learnings, like just by testing things.
Right. Yep.
And that's something I'm really passionate about now is number one, partner leaders out there, you are not alone. We are here to support you. There's an amazing community, for example, called Partnership Leaders, which I highly recommend you join,
Of
that will
course.
help you level up and that cares about your success collectively. Number two, my mission is to ensure that I share best practices, principles, and frameworks to help you be successful. And that's what motivates me is seeing people implement this in the field at their companies and it works. And they come back and they're like, thank you so much. Like I feel much more successful. I have much more time to spend with my family because I'm not spending, hours building a deck. Or I'm not just trying to throw spaghetti at the wall and hope it lands. I've done your approach and it saved me tons of energy and time. And now I probabilistically am much more successful. That's the kind of response I want to hear from partner leaders and what motivates me to do what I do with this company. And that's what's really been, my core motivation around doing this.
Yeah, I love that. And, I love that you kind of built this kind of altruistically from day one of like, hey, this is something that ultimately I wish I had when I was early in my career. I think, since you're such a deep subject matter expert on the pain points that you're ultimately solving, I think that's leading to your rapid success, nearly at 10,000 subscribers, plenty of enterprise clients that you've worked with successfully. So I think that's great. The final question to wrap up, and you kind of hit on it, which was, what's the bigger mission here, right? What do you want partner principles to mean to the partnership community in, say, 5 years? You give us a good anecdote of ultimately what's driving your purpose for it, but how might you honestly assess your own success relative to your expectations now and, say, 5 years from now?
I would frame it this way. Principles and frameworks can stand the test of time, but playbooks do not. And what I hope is that founders, revenue leaders, operational leaders, product leaders, partnership leaders, services leaders, customer success leaders, right? The list goes on and on. Embrace this idea of having the right principles in place to go drive successful partner strategies. And if they are continuing to reference and use these principles that I write about in this newsletter and online in their partner strategy, and it's helping their partners be more successful and their company more successful and their customers more successful, then I'll feel like I have accomplished what I set out to do. So my hope is that people continue to leverage this years out, because I, in my heart, really believe it's timeless. Even with AI, even with all the advances we're seeing, it's still going to hold true.
Wow. I mean, we definitely, that is the teaser trailer for this episode, no doubt. That was extremely powerful. But look, Nelson, that takes us to the end of this conversation. This conversation was absolutely jam-packed. As a follower and subscriber of Partner Principle newsletter, I can vouch for how insanely tactical and practical it is. Like, absolutely stuff that you can utilize today, so to speak. So I highly encourage you to join relatively 10,000 folks who are tuning in weekly to Nelson's content. But Nelson, seriously, thank you so much for joining us. Ton of great content for folks at any stage in their partnerships career, and really appreciate your time today, Nelson.
Thanks, Chris. Appreciate it.